Hello, everyone. Welcome to our scientific Preemie chat. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples are the traditional guardians of this land we call Canada, in which we gather here today for this discussion. The Canadian Premature Babies Foundation head office is situated on the Treaty 13 territory, home of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. I am grateful to live, work, and play in this land. I'm Fabiana Bacchini. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, as known as CPBF, and I'm the mother of surviving twin born at 26 weeks. CPBF is a parent-led charitable organization that helps families in and after the NICU through education, support, and advocacy. If you are a family or a healthcare provider, please check our website, canadianpreemies.org. There you'll find resources and a community of people who want to see our little babes thrive. It is hard to believe, but we launched Preemie Chats 4 years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic to stay connected with the NICU community. Since then, Preemie Chat has become a reliable, engaged educational tool for healthcare providers and parents alike to talk about what matters, explore new ideas, and to learn together. If this is your first scientific Preemie Chat, it works a little differently than our regular Friday episodes. Today, we are bringing in experts with different care practices to discuss a topic that does not have consensus in the medical community around the world. Today, we'll be talking about America's FDA warning about probiotic use in preterm infants and where we go from there. The concept is straightforward enough. Preterm babies are fed bacteria that are considered to be beneficial in terms of being similar to the constituents of those in a breastfed baby. The anticipated result is that the growth of potential harmful bacteria in preterm colons is reduced. Many have seen a reduction in necrotizing enterocolitis and late onset sepsis with their use. The FDA is in US is warning. However, that preterm infants who are giving probiotics are at risk of invasive, potentially fatal disease caused by the bacteria or fungi contained in probiotics. And Canada's most popular probiotic product used in NICUs, the Florababy, has recently come off the market, leaving NICUs without a product to use. So, what is the way forward? Stay tuned. We have some lively discussion ahead, and we hope you will take part as well. Send us your comments and questions as we dive into our topic, and we'll try to address them during our time together. We are presenting this session in collaboration with our partners, the Canadian Preterm Birth Network, the Canadian Neonatal Network, EPIC, the Evidence-Based Practice for Improving Quality, the Family Integrated Care, and the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, and EFCNI, the European Foundation for the Care of Newborn Infants. I also want to thank our sponsor, Prolacta, for making programs like this possible. And we are thrilled to have a live audience from 24 different countries around the world. And as I mentioned before, we want to hear from you. Let us know where you're joining us from. Please send your questions and insights in the comments section. And we really want to hear from you and hear where your unit stands on probiotic use. Now, I'm very honored to introduce you to our moderators for this session. First, joining us live from Winnipeg, Manitoba, is Dr. Michael Narvi. He is the section head of neonatology in Winnipeg, medical director of the Child Health Transport Team, associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health Investigator in the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba. Dr. Narvi, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely a pleasure to be here and helping to talk about a very important topic that is really very topical right now in Canadian and US circles, if not the world, about what to do with probiotics.
Absolutely. And our next moderator is joining us live from Munich, Germany, Silke Mader. Silke is the chairwoman of the executive board and co-founder of EFCNI, the European Foundation for the Care of Newborn Infants. She's also a mother of a surviving twin who was born at 25 weeks and is now, I believe, 26 or 27 years old. Silke, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Fabiana. It's a pleasure being with you. And as the topic is really a hot topic, I guess, all over the world. And meanwhile, we have made already a couple of achievements in combining forces with a healthcare professional society as ESPEGAN, who is responsible for any kind of nutrition aspects in pediatrics, where we have published a paper on talking about the importance of not following the FDA regulation or warning, and also to make a statement in the paper what parents recommend for acting according to this warning, or how important it is to provide probiotics for our children.
Wonderful. So I will let you take the floor and introduce our guests, and I'll see you at the end of the session.
Thank you.
Sure. So we're going to jump right into the topic. And I just wanted to give a brief background before we introduce our guests. Probiotics have really, in neonatal circles, been a bit of a controversial thing for some time. There have been centers that have embraced them. There have been others that haven't. There's been a North American divide to a certain degree, with the American Academy of Pediatrics expressing some concern under 1,000 grams in the safety of probiotics. We've heard about the FDA statement or warning from September of 2023. And I can say, even from a personal standpoint, even within my own city where I practice at the University of Manitoba, we couldn't come to consensus on both sides of the river, with one hospital embracing probiotics and another one saying that we didn't want to use them. So now that we have the FDA warning, it really has pressed, I would say, the world to really look at how probiotics are used. And there are numerous questions that I'm looking forward to hearing about, such as how do we ensure quality? How do we adapt, or how do we address when an infection occurs? And before I introduce our first panelist, I think it's important to acknowledge that probiotics are really not that different than medications. Medications have side effects. There are patients who die every year in this world from adverse effects of medications. And while I'm not suggesting that probiotics are leading to an excessive number of deaths, in fact, it's quite rare, we have to accept that, like with any medication, we're talking about balancing benefit versus harm. And that's what I hope we focus on today. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Burmick. Jennifer, or Jenny, as I think you may go by, is an associate professor and neonatologist at the University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital. We're particularly happy to have you here today because you've had a long-standing interest in the the intestinal microbiome and how probiotics impact health and disease. So welcome, Jenny. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Do you want me to say a little something else, or just introduce everyone else?
No, I'm curious. What are your opening thoughts on how this, I guess you work in the States, you work in Iowa. You've had the AAP generally recommending under 1,000 grams if there's insufficient data. But what have your thoughts been? Do you feel that that's legitimate, or do you think that's overly cautious?
I actually think it's more than overly cautious. I think it's actively detrimental to the health of our preterm babies, which you can tell which side of the fence I land on here. But
very quickly, yes.
We've been a probiotic using center here at Iowa for over 10 years, and so feel very strongly about their safety and benefit and lack of adverse effects. So it's kind of where I stand, but happy to talk about that more.
All right. Well, we'll really get into that shortly. Thank you. Silke?
Yeah, so thank you, Jenny. I have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker. It's Dr. Niels Rochow, who is a neonatologist of the University Children's Hospital in Nuremberg, and he's also teaching at the university in Rostock, Germany, and his main interest is on nutrition and growth, and also of the development of preterm infants. So, Niels, I hope the technique is working, that I can hand over. to you to. Can you hear us, Niels?
Maybe while we're waiting for Niels to join, and hopefully the technology will come in okay. Let's introduce our final panelist, who is Dr. Kavya Rao, joining us from Buffalo, New York. She is an attending neonatologist at, I'm going to get this wrong, Oishei? Oishei. My apologies. And an assistant professor of pediatrics at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Science. She has an interest in neonatal growth and, importantly, as relevant to this topic, a clinical research interest in neonatal nutrition on a human milk diet, which is also a topic in and of itself. So welcome.
Thank you all. Excited to be here.
And Niels, can you do you have a couple comments if you unmute? If you hear us, I'm not sure if you hear us.
I guess it has still problems.
Okay. Well, we are going to try to keep the conversation moving. So I guess, Jenny, we've already heard your position. My question was going to be, where do you stand on probiotic use? But I'd be curious, because the US is a big place. I'm sure there are state differences, hospital differences. Kavya, since I believe it was September 29th of 2023 that the FDA issued its warning after there was a single patient who passed away from Bifidobacterium longus, one case under 1,000 grams. And after that, there was a reaction to stop or discourage the use of probiotics. How did you react in Buffalo?
So I'll start by saying that we are a level 4 large NICU, 65-bed NICU in a referral center in the Western New York area. And prior to me joining, I've been here for about 3 years, but historically our unit had not been using probiotics, and for several reasons. But so with the new recommendation or lack of recommendation of using probiotics since last year, as much as a few folks in our group were open to maybe potentially trying it out after that last policy statement, everyone sort of paused, and I said, okay, maybe not the right time. And as you mentioned, Michael, probiotics should be taken as the same standard of scrutiny as medications and shouldn't be any different. So from the FDA standpoint, I feel like it needs to go through these rigorous studies and having very large analyses and randomized controlled trials with different centers, and shouldn't be taken in any other different standard.
So I have a follow-up question that maybe Jenny, you would like to field on this one, because my understanding, of the situation with probiotics is that, we've had thousands upon thousands of patients that have gone through randomized studies. And so, Jenny, you alluded to, you said something very provocative at the top, which is great for these forums, which was, essentially saying that to not use probiotics, I'll paraphrase, is to not use at your own peril when you're caring for preterm infants. So what is the strength of your assertion coming from? Is it from the findings from all the randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews that have preceded? And maybe both of you, and Silke, you can join in too, or Niels can join in. What are the purported benefits that we may be losing out on by not using probiotics?
Yeah, so I just want to start out by saying that I don't think every NICU should have to use them, but I think not having the option to use them and knowing your own population, weighing the risks and benefits of your own patients, I think is problematic, more so than centers choosing not to use them. I think that that's very appropriate because everyone weighs the literature and the information a little bit differently. I think not having the option is the detrimental part. I do think that there's an abundance of clinical trials containing over 25,000 preterm infants using different types of probiotics, different combinations, different strains, single organism, multi-organism. And it's, a little bit hard to interpret all that literature, but I think it's really powerful that the systematic analyses show benefit in reducing NEC and all-cause mortality and late onset sepsis, even with such heterogeneity amongst all the trials. So I do think that there's strong evidence that they work and that they're beneficial. In those 25,000 randomized preterm infants in those trials, there were no events of sepsis from probiotic organisms. So even though there's a handful of case reports, I think the last I saw 32, that's such a low incidence compared to the products that were in these randomized clinical trials, which were really well controlled. So I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask you on that point. You know, up here in Canada, we are a much smaller country, but I have to say, when I read the FDA warning, the first thing that happened was I started scratching my head and I said, this is nothing new, you know, because our center, as I divulged at the beginning, when we were debating, should we use, should we not use, we reviewed that literature and we saw the case reports of sepsis, you know, with organisms that were administered to infants. We also saw, which we can talk about as well, some of the early concerns which may still be present about what exactly are you buying, what's the quality control of these products, and are you putting into the child what you think you're putting into the child. But having said that, this is nothing new that children or babies have perished or become septic, at least with probiotics. So why now? Like, what was it about this particular case that you think triggered the FDA after all these years to finally focus on one case and say, we are not recommending anyone use?
I honestly don't know what it was that tipped them over. As you mentioned, this is not new.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure what it was exactly about this. And it's another thing that's really strange about it is they didn't just go after the company or companies that resulted in sepsis from their product. They went after all probiotics.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that they would do this in another instance. If, say, one company that made penicillin had bad effects from their penicillin, I don't think they'd say nobody can ever use penicillin from any companies. It's just a really strange blanket statement against an entire kind of field of medicine, as you alluded to, that we could provide that has risks and benefits like other medicines. So I actually really don't know what was behind the FDA statement. I find it odd. I find it also odd that the two names on the FDA email, none of them had neonatal expertise. There probably was some neonatal expertise in the background going into this decision. Why those names weren't on this letter, I'm not sure. It was an internal medicine physician and a veterinarian. Found that to be a little bit strange. I emailed them, actually. I am leading our probiotic task force here at Iowa. So I emailed them a couple days after that email initially came out, asking for clarification, providing some citations in literature, since the only literature that they had cited within their letter was the AAP statement and a couple case reports. So I felt that they needed a little more robust literature to look at. And I haven't heard anything from them.
So I have I'm going a bit off script here, but one of the things, and any one of our panel can talk about, because we have representation here from Europe, we have representation from Canada. You're sort of a cross-pollinator, if you will, Kavya, Canadian in the US. But my question is, I don't think there's much secret that the US is more of a litigious society than Canada. And with a statement or a warning by the FDA that states do not use, given the risk, I'm curious how comfortable practitioners in the US are with continuing to use. The outcome of interest, which is a tragic outcome, would be either sepsis with the organism that's provided, or worse, death. How big are concerns in talking to colleagues and maybe at the annual meetings for the AAP or the PAS? Have you heard any grumblings about fears of medical legal reprisal if one was to actually have a case in using probiotics? And how do you respond to that?
I think those are some really good questions and a very loaded question. But I think when we talk about interventions such as introducing probiotics that are not FDA approved, I think our ultimate endpoint here is either NEC or mortality or late onset sepsis, and a lot of these studies that have been published, I think there's definitely a sense of fear and uncertainty, as much as, like Jenny had mentioned, is one of the largest patient populations being studied, like 25,000 patients in the large meta-analyses. And there is obviously, benefit that you can see, but I think there has to be like larger studies or sizes that are testing, a large N in one institution with one intervention. I know there's different types of probiotics out there. There's a single strain, there's a triple stain. So I think it's really important to narrow down exactly which one shows benefit, which one's effective, the side effects, how to use it, which population to use it, what is the right, and maybe even just tailoring it to a particular population that's at high risk and stratify the risk. I think in our center, we've, again, I'm not an expert on probiotics and I do not have any financial disclosures in any company, but I think when we had struggled a couple of years ago with a high rate of NEC, and specifically with surgical NEC, we had really, put our brains together and really had this multiple meetings trying to tease out what can we do to decrease our rates of NEC, feeding intolerance. And I think what we were more worried about is surgical NEC. We actually had a streak of high incidence of surgical NEC a couple of years ago. And I think at that point, probiotics had definitely come up. It had risen to the surface. We're like, why aren't we doing it? It's obviously been studied. Many centers in New York State are using it. So why not us? And at that point, obviously, there was a lot of discussion and discrepancy. But we had started to look at other things that we can do within our control in our unit. So as everyone knows, with NEC, it's multifactorial. There's no sort of one thing that affects it. Also, keeping in mind our patient population, we are a level 4 center. Our main patient population is inner city Buffalo, where we suffer from the lower socioeconomic status, for prenatal care, high rates of polysubstance abuse in moms, and high rates of IUGR and poor prenatal care. So I think what our population that we deal with are already at the highest risk of these morbidities, such as NEC. So when we start to look at all the different factors that we could potentially control, such as, fixing our feeding protocol, having consistency within following our feeding protocols, trying to maximize our usage of mother's own milk. We do also, we were introducing donor milk in our unit in 2018. So we wanted to start teasing out what other factors here we can control, or at least try to streamline before we start jumping into other interventions such as probiotics.
Well, thank you. Niels, I see that you're with us.
Yeah.
Do you have any additional comments on the impact of the FDA warning?
Mm-hmm. So maybe I will tell a little bit about our story from our hospital, how we deal with probiotics and with our strategy. So some years ago, around 2016, when my boss, Christoph Fusch, was moving over to Germany, Nuremberg Hospital, at this situation, there was quite higher rate of sepsis. There was also necrotizing enterocolitis in a couple of babies, and they also used probiotics at this time already. This was one product, one stain product, and sometimes they have seen also in a blood culture positive the stain. So when he arrived there, he stopped using this product, and then the plan was made how to improve the NICU. So it includes hygiene, proper hand disinfection. Then we included exclusively breast milk feeding. We introduced targeted fortification using also just human milk products, so no cow milk sports and the tiny micro preemies. And by decreasing sepsis rate with all these measures, there was still a little percentage of sepsis. So we were then considering, because the evidence is quite strong, that probiotics have positive effects on decreasing sepsis rate and also decreasing NEC. So, and then there was a lucky situation that this European product from Sweden came up, which is a very high quality product in terms of preparation. So it has 3 stains, and then we introduced the product. And what we can see, or what we can say from our experience during that time, also we had the feeling that sepsis rate was coming down, and that is, we have not seen any side effect from it. So no positive blood culture anymore with this product. And what I think is, when you do all these measures, everything contributes somehow to improve sepsis rate, side effects, necrotizing enterocolitis. Then I think also the probiotics and prebiotic role to improve the outcome, because the mechanism is clear. That I will say the good bacterials will then lead to a situation that the others will not be present, and we have also immune modulation. Seeing our results, I can only say that these problems which were there in the past, we have not seen since. And it is being used in all babies below 32 weeks, and we use it then up to 34 weeks. And the same with exclusively breast milk feeding. All babies below 32 weeks receive in our unit until 35 weeks or before discharge, exclusively breast milk feeding.
Thank you. Silke, any further comments from you? I know your name is on a statement from the European group, but do you have any comments, or do you have any questions for the panel?
Yes, I would have maybe a question to every one of you, because when on one hand, of course, we have this warning, and we also have heard evidence behind, and the reason, but we not exactly know why FDA has sent out the warning because of cases. What we always, as patient or parent representatives, and finally also the individual parents, want is really the best care or the best products, the best treatment with our children can have. And I was wondering how you inform parents about it, because when there is the evidence on the one hand, but you have the warning on the other side, is there any opportunity to inform parents about probiotics, the pro and con, so that they can be involved in decision-making processes? Or this is what we also have recommended in our recommendation we have published together with ESPGHAN, that parents are involved in such decision-making. And of course, we are not recommending for every baby born preterm to have probiotics, so that you also individually use. But we have heard from Niels that every baby in their unit under 32 weeks, they are getting it. So do you have any guidance or anything what you are recommending to inform parents about the pro and cons to make decisions? Is there anything what you are have implemented as a kind of information?
So what we're doing here in Nuremberg with all the micro preemies, usually it's a more or less planned delivery. So, or then we do a prenatal counseling, and during our prenatal counseling, we talk about exclusively breast milk feeding, that we are using commercial products in order to do that, because at this time we do not have a milk bank in our hospital. Therefore, we are relying on the commercial products. And in this discussion, we also encourage parents to breastfeeding, and we then explain also the microbiome, and that it is our standard of care that we're using probiotics. Parents can always withdraw from it, but we have not seen any parents so far who was not agreeing with our standards. So with the explanation that there is this position statement from the ESPGHAN, and that it has positive side effects, parents usually agree on this suggestion.
Jenny, before you respond, the thought that I had was, is it time for informed consent? And is that what you already do?
That's a fantastic question. I think when we were using probiotics, we did not do informed consent. We did similar to what Niels did, which is we talked about using probiotics in preterm infants as our standard of care. We also used it in under 32-week infants routinely, with a low threshold to stop it if we were worried about abdominal pathology, because I do think there's literature that abdominal pathology makes bacterial translocation and the risk of sepsis higher. But we were not doing informed consent. I know that there were many units in the United States right after the FDA warning came out that started to do informed consent and was trying to continue doing the probiotics. We stopped our probiotic use in that setting, and now we don't have access to a safe product, a product that we feel is safe. Similar to what you were mentioning, Michael, we can't get the product from Canada, Florababy, anymore. That's what we were using. There was one product in the US that has now been pulled that was well regulated, and we don't know of any other products that we can easily get. So we don't feel that any product we can use is safe enough to even offer to families at this point. But I do think informed consent or a shared decision-making with the family and the parents would be a great way to go if we could get our hands on a safe product.
You know, it's interesting. When I look at the statement or commentary from FSCAN, which Silke was involved with, there's a very important point raised that, you know, while the FDA is calling for better control of product quality in terms of creating or making manufacturers use, good practices, to ensure that you get pharmaceutical grade quality. I'm never going to say that pharmaceutical grade quality is not important, but I'd appreciate some comments on, because the European commentary addressed this and suggested that, so what, in the sense of, are we really going to prevent what the concern is, whether it's a pharmaceutical grade bifidobacterium product or multi-strain product, whether it is a food grade or nutrition grade product, if the end concern is sepsis with the organism, do you think it'll make any difference whether it is a pharmaceutical grade or whether it is nutrition grade? And has the FDA then really missed the mark? I don't know who wants to take that. Any comments, or is that too hot to handle? Well, I mean, I guess that, in the absence of a comment immediately, that I thought was a very, very interesting comment by the European group, that, one of the things that we really about 10, 15 years ago were struggling with as a group to try to decide if we would use probiotics was there were a few studies that demonstrated that in some cases there was 0 bacteria % in the product. It was all filler. In some cases there was a near 100%, but it was the wrong bacteria. And in some cases it was somewhere in between, where the predominant bacteria was what was on the bottle, but there was also other stuff in there too. But so I don't know, maybe that's something that someone such as our great panel here needs to advocate for, is to really question, I guess, the veterinarian, as you mentioned, who was involved, but really if they'll respond, but to ask them, what ultimately is the goal of all of this? How are you going to, what will happen that's different, I guess, is my question, if it becomes pharmaceutical grade? And maybe that's what we can answer. Is there any benefit other than assuring the public that what you're providing is what is stipulated to be in there?
I guess, yes, I have some thoughts on this. I've been speaking a lot, so I was pausing to let other people get some words in here. I think it is highly important that we regulate probiotics. I don't think they necessarily can only need to be regulated through the FDA, but I do think it's important we know what is in it, that the appropriate bacteria is in it. We are actually providing live organisms, and we're not providing things that may actively be detrimental to the infant gut. I think the case that spurred the probiotic warning was a product that contained MCT oil, which in animal studies has been shown to break down the intestinal barrier. So not a great product to probably be giving with the probiotic at the same time. So I do think there is definitely a role for quality control in the probiotics. I do think there are companies outside of the US in particular who do this very well and have well-regulated products. It sounds like the product that Neil's NICU uses is a well-regulated product. So I think it's important that we have a product that we can trust and know what's in it, but I don't think that it should only be regulated by the FDA.
Okay. I have a follow-up question because I'm looking at Kavya. She doesn't know it's coming yet, but Kavya and Niels can respond to this one. I'm trying to serve up at one for you, which is, in your bio, Kavya, it was mentioned that, your unit, and Niels also mentioned in the smallest babies uses an exclusive human milk diet. And so I guess my question is, how do you think that if we can have enough human milk in our units and use exclusively human milk, can we accomplish the same things and achieve the same benefits of giving probiotics? And before you speak, I'm going to bring it back to Jenny as a final thought. Are there any benefits that might be achieved beyond the exclusive human milk diet if we were to do them together, probiotics and the exclusive human milk diet, in terms of microbiome? Because I know that's, Jenny, your interest. So maybe Kavya and Niels can comment first on, can we just get away with using an exclusive human milk diet and then not even worry about this?
Yeah, so I think I can go first. So as I mentioned, in the past, we did struggle with a pretty high NEC rate, especially we had a subset of our population that actually had a lot of surgical NEC, shockingly. And I think we tried to tease apart like what happened, why did we have such a spike? And it wasn't just like a 1-year outlier. This was sort of consistent over a couple of years. When we compare our data to like the New York State Perinatal Society and the Vaughan data, we were definitely standing out. And so when we looked at potential reasons for why, and I felt like before we introduce a new factor in the system, I think it's important to try to streamline other things that we are currently doing and try to regulate those better. So coming from a quality improvement standpoint, because I love QI, and I think we tried to come up with a bundle, which we're still actively working on. So I think, like I mentioned before, we started to talk about our feeding protocols. Like, are we adequately adhering to feeding protocols? And I think it could just be simple changes. It doesn't have to be convoluted. It doesn't have to be too many players into the intervention. So adhering to feeding protocols, trying to increase our use of maternal milk. Also things like introducing the exclusive human milk diet. So as we all know, like premature babies have the highest risk of developing NEC. And back in the day when we had such high NEC rates, we did look at what our potential reasons were. We deal with a very high-risk population where our ability to provide maternal milk or mother's own milk was actually subpar. So we actually talked about introducing lactation consultants and having our nurses work with moms to improve their milk supply. Secondly, we started to look at the implementation of a human milk diet and a human milk-based fortifier. So I've had experience using a human milk-based fortifier in my training and fellowship in my job prior to starting here. And I did notice that there was actually a very positive tolerance to tolerating human milk and exclusive human milk versus bovine fortification. Having exclusive human milk diet allowed us to start fortifying earlier, advancing feeds faster. We noticed a significant tolerance in babies that were fed a human milk diet. Our time on TPN and our time for central lines were much shorter. We noticed a lot less neck workups, a lot less x-rays. Also, our antibiotic usage rate had significantly dropped. That also went hand in hand with our antibiotic stewardship. So using antibiotics for prolonged periods of time, so cutting the 48 hours to 36 hours, and we're even talking about shorter amount of time now. And especially for culture negative sepsis, where we're unsure, is this sepsis, is this not? Are we just treating these kids until, you know, the baby gets better? We've noticed significant changes in our baby's tolerance and just overall our medical and surgical neck rates. It was a pretty dramatic drop. And like in QI, it's small iterative changes. And I feel like if you can try to stick with a system that works and do it really well, I think you can achieve really good outcomes without introducing other factors.
Thank you. Niels, anything to add?
Yeah. So we were at the time when we introduced the probiotics, we were also considering, or we did QI project in order to see whether dosing is enough, whether the duration of treatment is long enough. So our understanding was, because breast milk has HMO, so human milk oligosaccharides, which is feeding for the good bacterials, it's maybe enough in those babies just seed the probiotics for a short time. So we, at this time, we gave for infants on exclusively breast milk feeding for 7 days the probiotics, and we analyzed the stool, and we looked at the microbiome, how this is changing, whether we can find the probiotics which we gave also in the stool of those babies which received the probiotics. And then we compared it to the group of babies which has not exclusively breast milk feeding, and those babies received continuously the probiotics. And the finding was quite interesting. In some babies receiving exclusively breast milk feeding, the treatment with probiotics after 7 days was not lasting for long. So they disappeared by time and were not present anymore. So along with this finding, we changed our treatment now that we give in all babies the probiotics, independent whether exclusively breast milk feeding or not. They receive probiotics almost until discharge. When you see the recent understanding of the microbiome and how it's developing, then it also makes sense, because the microbiome is something which is very unique, and during a day, millions of mutations also happening there, and the growth of different bacterials also interacts, and therefore humans and already a preterm baby seems to have a unique microbiome, which if we want to have certain bifidoflora there and it's not present, that those bacteria needs to be given continuously in some babies, and others maybe they would last if you just seed it.
Thank you. Niels, I'm gonna just, we have a few more questions, so I'd like to jump to Jenny for her thoughts across the pond, so to speak, and then we're gonna have a couple more questions before we close. But thank you very much. That's fascinating. Jenny, any further thoughts on, is there more bang for your buck if you add probiotics to an exclusive human milk diet?
I would say yes. I think mom's own milk, I think we all know, is the best thing for almost all babies. Unfortunately, not all moms can provide it, and so donor pasteurized human milk is a great alternative, but it's pasteurized, so it has no bacteria in it, and so I don't think it's feasible that we're going to be able to provide every baby with unpasteurized or mom's own milk. We can do a lot of QI efforts to make our rates better, and I think that that's a very worthy endeavor. But I think that the addition of probiotics to human milk is going to benefit the most babies, because we know we're providing them with bacteria that is beneficial to them.
Are we seeing any so at the top of the meeting here, we talked about one of the benefits of probiotics being a reduction in rates of necrotizing enterocolitis. It's early because the FDA warning only came out in September, but are there any concerns going around or any signals that we're starting to see rises in rates of NEC since units have stopped perhaps using probiotics? Has anyone published on that, or is there a concern about that?
I haven't seen any publications yet. I expect we'll see some come out. We fortunately here at Iowa have a very, very low rate of NEC, like less than 1%. And so we had that before we instituted probiotics. So I don't expect us to see a major increase, but we have seen an increase in babies with frankly bloody stools and neck workups and just kind of anecdotal feeding intolerance since stopping probiotics, but we haven't quantified that yet. But I'd be interested to hear from other institutions.
Have either of our other panelists heard of anything, any alarming signs with, well, I guess, Kavya, I know your center's not using probiotics, so you probably can't comment, but
there's also a question, Michael, about the Canadian situation when the probiotics are not available anymore in the near future, or also what you said before, potentially already yet in Canada. What are the consequences for your country at the moment? That's also a question in the chat.
I guess I'll put my hat on as the Canadian neonatologist and join the panel. So locally, like I work in Manitoba, right in the center of the country. I know we have people from all over the world. So I'm literally, there's a sign about 10 miles outside of my home that says, welcome to the center of Canada. So that's where I am. So our center, after the warning, we looked at our own data and we saw that we weren't really seeing a persistent reduction in necrotizing enterocolitis or late onset sepsis when we looked back over time, because we actually wanted to see, it was very interesting. One center was not using, as I mentioned, and one center was using. And so we were able to compare rates of NEC, late onset sepsis, and we didn't see any strong signals that there was any persistent benefit from using probiotics. Now, so when the warning came out, we just made a decision that because we didn't really see that strong evidence clinically, we were going to stop using altogether. So I work in a center where we don't use them at all currently, but we do have under 750 grams or under 27 weeks in exclusive human milk diet. Having said all that, I am aware through a division head / section head texting group in Canada that there are many of my colleagues that are a little stressed about this because they are strong believers in probiotics. And with Florababy leaving the market at the moment, there isn't an alternative, although I know we are looking Canada-wide at bringing in a product out of Europe. I suspect it's probably the same product whose name I don't think we should be naming companies, but I think I know which company it is out in Sweden and know the former CEO of that company. But I think at the end of the day, all that we can do at the moment is, I think, really push for exclusive human milk diets. But beyond that, and I'm going to make a plug that I hope gets a round of applause, because I think I'm not saying it just for the applause, but because it's what we should be doing. It's not just about exclusive human milk diet. Now more than ever, if we don't have programs, like what if you don't have a donor breast milk program? Like Kavya, you mentioned you just brought yours in 2018. So what if you're working in a center, a smaller center, where you don't have access to donor milk, you don't have access to probiotics? It puts the exclamation mark on ensuring that we maximize opportunities for education and support of mothers to optimize their breast milk output, or not output, but their production, and sort of coming to volume, if you will, as quickly as possible. And maybe this is our wake-up call as Canadians, that we often talk about the importance of breast milk, but now's the time to put the rubber to the road, so to speak, and really maybe employ tactics that Kavya is well schooled in to say, from a quality improvement lens, how do we actually achieve higher rates of mother's own milk? So anyway, I'm not a panelist, but that's what I think we can do here in Canada.
Yeah, I guess what we all can do all over the world is, because when we want to have more mother's own milk, and even when we want to have more donor milk, but as you said, not everywhere it's available, and it is not pasteurized when you give it, really, it means how do you get more mother's own milk. It's not only pumping and getting them to producing the milk. It's really what can you do? And when we see the hospitals who have really a very good mother's own milk, who have a lot of access to mother's own milk, that's when they have a very warm, welcoming policy that parents, or especially the moms, have 24/7 access to the NICU, to their baby, having the opportunity to kangaroo, to stay overnight. And especially when I see in the US where you not have maternity leave, then it's challenging for mothers, or there are long distances like you have in Canada also. And also we have it in Germany, we also have distances, but not what you have in Canada or in the US. And that is really the challenge. How can you produce mother's own milk when you have separation, or when you not have the opportunity to stay overnight, or when you are not providing food and drinks for mothers? I guess this is also one thing what everyone, we can talk about probiotics or about fortification, but when you not be able to provide mother's own milk because of so many problems or challenges parents face around, then you not even be able to go fully breastfed home because of having this really long time in the NICU where you are struggling. I guess that is mother's own milk is not only, I would say, a drug and a product what you're providing. You only can produce this milk when a lot of aspects are around to be able to breastfeed, because that is often forgotten when we talk about the importance of mother's own milk, that it is a lot of things around what you need to provide that the mother is producing the milk. That is very, very important to not forget this in the topic of this technical aspect of a mother's own milk provision.
Thank you, Silke. Incredible points, and thank you for sneaking them in there. So we're coming to the top of the hour. So in the last 5 minutes, one of the things that I wanted to do is, we just got some great questions from the audience, and I think I can roll them into one, which is, and again, a little bit of controversy is always good. So with respect to fortification, because that's what the question is about, so using human milk fortifiers, we've heard about a human-based milk fortifier that I know Kavya uses, our center uses, perhaps Jenny and Niels use as well. No. But the question becomes, historically, when you're using bovine-based fortifiers, we often will institute fortifiers in our center, for example, at 80 milliliters per kilogram per day when enteral intake has reached 80. I've heard arguments to suggest that because you're using, if you have a human milk product, that if it's human milk, why wait? And so my question to the panel is, and I guess, Jenny, I already know your answer because you're not using the product, but for those that use an exclusive human milk diet, is your practice different? Do you start fortification earlier? And do you have evidence that you can achieve better growth if you do start earlier?
Yeah, I think I can take that question. So definitely feel the tolerance, or at least the comfort level, both anecdotally and even in data that I think our center is going to publish very soon. We found that we're able to fortify much sooner. Like, so we start at fortification at 60 ml per kilo per day, but there's actually talk on starting it perhaps even earlier at 50. And so far, we actually fortify with 26 calories at 60 per kilo, and then go up to adding cream, so extra fat to the milk at 100 per kilo, and then watch the growth very carefully. So historically, there's always been concerns about growth on exclusive human milk and donor milk because it just doesn't have the calories, and the protein content is deficient. However, when we actually look at our data, when we look at pre-implementation and post-implementation, we notice that there is definitely the same or even better growth in babies that are actually fed an exclusive human milk diet from our center. And again, this is a single-centered based data that was just basically comparing pre and post implementation in 2 different epochs, where previously we had fortified with a bovine milk-based fortifier, and we fortified much later at 80 ml per kilo, or sometimes even at 100, and we went much slower on advancing our feeds. But since the implementation of an exclusively human milk diet, we started to fortify sooner, and we're able to achieve full enteral feeds, that is defined as 150 ml per kilo per day, much faster. And we looked at our central line days. They were also much shorter in the epoch that was fed a human milk diet. So again, that was our positive growth outcomes, and also our reduction in NEC rates. But that brings me to the topic of cost. Again, I am fully aware that it's a very expensive product. And when we had talked about implementing an exclusive human milk diet, and again, it's human milk. And like Jay Kim says, with more milk comes more responsibility. We are actually lucky, or actually we have a very well-built milk lab and an entire process around how we receive human milk and how we process our donor milk and store it. So we have an entire sophisticated lab program and system where we have milk techs that don't mix milk at bedside. It's in a very controlled, sterile environment, and that we're able to do it in a very systematic way where we do it in the NICU and give it to the nurses. And we haven't seen much complications with it, but I can imagine other smaller units that are not equipped with such systems built in to be able to handle this diet. And that also brings me to comparing it to probiotics. So again, probiotics also, there's so many different holes that could potentially happen where you're not handling the probiotic mixing process a certain way. Is it done sterilely? Is it done at bedside? Who's doing it? How is it being mixed? So these are all questions, and it's so variable between units that I think it's important to streamline a particular unit system that works in the unit.
Well, thank you very much. You know what? We're coming short on time, so I'm actually going to give Niels the opportunity just as we're getting to the end. And I have to say, this has been such a pleasure, and I'm grateful to the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation for asking me to moderate along with Silky, because I can tell you I've learned quite a bit today. Niels, any final thoughts? I'd like to give you final thoughts, then we'll go to Jenny, then we'll go to Kavya before we let Fabiana close out. So any final thoughts, things that you really feel we need to know about probiotics that you'd like to leave us with?
So I think it's an important measure which can be used to contribute to improve feeding and to improve growth, because on the long term, and it seems like that babies have less side effects, like less sepsis, better feeding tolerance. That is what how the data feels like. However, always you need to have a huge sample size in order to see the reduction in NEC rate. So, for example, if you have a NEC rate of 3%, then you need a sample size of 500, maybe 1,000 infants to see any difference, if you can really say it. From the current point of view and understanding, breast milk feeding plus probiotics plus adding enough calories, protein in a sophisticated ratio to the energy, because just protein is also not enough, and we know that breast milk has a high variation, so we need to put the whole package together, because only one little change will maybe not be the great improvement for everything. So we need to be great on hygiene, we need to be great on nutrition and addings like microbiome, probiotics, maybe also prebiotics.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, any final thoughts? Messages you want to get out to the world?
I mean, I think as you kind of started off this conversation, it's all about weighing risks and benefits, and that's going to be a little bit different for every individual neonatologist, every individual unit, every family that you're having a discussion with. But I think the majority of medications we use in the NICU are not FDA approved for the indication we're using them for. And so I think it's a bit odd that we're not allowed to use a well-studied therapy that's proven to be safe in clinical trials. And so I think it's unfortunate that we can't weigh that risk benefit for ourselves anymore. And hopefully with enough pushing like you've done in Europe, we can maybe make some progress in being able to get some well-regulated products to offer.
Thank you. Kavya, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm actually just looking forward to, like Jenny mentioned, like some robust trials with a particular product that if the AAP can come up with a statement saying it is safe, it is regulated, it is being widely tested, and if there's a clear, clean study out there that can that can show all the benefit, which I believe it can. I think our unit would definitely be happy to look into those and potentially adapt it.
Thank you. Silke, I'm gonna, from a parental perspective, anything that you think you'd like to make a comment about before we close?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, for us it's important, of course, that when such decisions are made, that they are really made on an evidence base, and that it is really important to involve the parents in decision-making processes. And as I said before, it's important when we talk about the best nutrition that we talk about the whole perspective of mother's own milk, donor milk, probiotics, and to see the parents as main caregivers being involved in decisions, but also to see mother's own milk as the main nutrition opportunity, what a baby really need, and that this really means the whole involvement of the parents to be able to provide mother's own milk. And yeah, and then I would go back. I guess we are closing now and giving the last words to Fabiana. I would like to thank Jenny, Kavya, and Niels for joining us today. And it was a pleasure for me to co-chair with Michael, even when I'm not a medical expert, but really having the whole perspective of parent perspective, the nutrition experts from all over the world, and having you, Michael, and joining here together. And thank you, Fabiana, for having us all 5 here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Again, it's been such a pleasure hosting this session and having you, Michael and Silke, moderating this panel with us. I'm very grateful to all of you for such an incredible discussion.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And as Silke said, thank you all of you from joining us here today, our moderators, our expert panelists, and of course, our online community from 24 countries. We are coming to a close with our discussion today, but this is just the beginning of this very important conversation. The more we can learn from each other and exchange ideas, data, and practice from around the world, the more our NICU families can have better care experiences. That's what we strive for. It has been a privilege to host the Scientific Preemie Chat as you work to advance care together. It takes many voices and many hands, and you have all certainly contributed to that today. So thank you. We'll be doing this again soon with another neonatal hot topic, so you keep your ear to the ground for upcoming news on that. Also, if you have an idea for a future topic, please reach out to us and let us know what you want to hear about. If you missed a part of the debate today, please head over to our YouTube channel or to our website. By the end of this week, we're going to upload this video there. You can see all our episodes and a tremendous library of more than 300 sessions on various topics recorded there. So a special thank again to our partners and our sponsor for this session, Prolacta. And as I mentioned before, CPBF is a charitable organization. And so I ask you to consider how you can support CPBF and its mission to empower families of premature babies in every step of their journey. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. So if you are here live today, join us this coming Friday on our regularly scheduled Preemie Chat, going live at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be talking about why won't my preemie sleep at home. Don't miss it. In the meantime, be well, and thank you, everyone.